Hello, everyone. Welcome to Election 2020 and the Road Ahead with Professor Tom Nichols. I'm Jill Felicio. I am the Director of Advancement here at the Division of Continuing Education. It's wonderful to see all of you popping on, and it looks like we're getting up there in the hundreds already. Welcome, and it is delightful to have you from all over the world. We have over 700 of you joining from a whopping 29 countries on 6 continents and as far away as Australia and Zambia. So while we wait for folks to pop on, I just want to give a couple of housekeeping notes. We have the chat available for a few moments here before Tom gets underway, where you can tell us where you're coming from, say hello. And I wanted to give you a little background. I am in Director of Advancement. I extend global opportunities for our community to benefit professionally, socially, and continuously learn, and have visited with thousands of you in 30 cities around the world. And part of that work was developing chapters of our alumni association, the Harvard Extension Alumni Association. So I want to give a very special thank you to our Midwest chapter of the Harvard Extension Alumni Association, who are joining us today. They actually conceived of this event and graciously invited Tom to join us as a speaker. So thank you all for the work that you do. And I encourage all of you, wherever you are in the world, to consider joining one of our chapters. There are 6 US chapters. There is New York City, Washington, DC, the Midwest, as I mentioned, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Texas. We're also developing chapters in Latin America, Southeast Asia, India, Canada, and Western Europe. So wherever you are, please join in. We have so much fun, and there's so many opportunities there. Now, it is really a pleasure to introduce Tom, really a man who needs no introduction, but he is the king of expertise. So I think we should go through just a little bit. He is currently a university professor of national security affairs at the Naval War College. He is a renowned and so beloved Harvard Extension School instructor. You may have taken his courses, Popular Culture and US Foreign Policy during the Cold War, or Nuclear Weapons and International Security. He is a Petra Shattuck Excellence in Teaching Award winner from 2012, and he's previously taught at Dartmouth College and Georgetown University. He gave a wonderful lecture at our 2018 alumni weekend around his book, The Death of Expertise, The Campaign Against Established Knowledge and Why It Matters. And he has another book called Nuclear Weapons and US National Security from 2014. And he has previously been a Secretary of the Navy Fellow, the Forrest Sherman Chair of Public Diplomacy, and the Chairman of the Strategy Department. He has worked for the Carnegie Council on Ethics and International Affairs in New York City, a Fellow of the International History Institute at Boston University. He was staff for Defense and Security Affairs in the US Senate for the late Senator John Hines of Pennsylvania. And he has worked in the International Security Program and on the project on managing the atom at Harvard Kennedy School. So really, what a resume. And we are so delighted to have him here today. So without further ado, Tom, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Jill, and thank you all so much for having me. And my apologies for those of you who showed up last week. You know, absent-minded professor is not just a stereotype. It actually happens on occasion, and I had the wrong time and the wrong thing in my calendar, and all I can do is abjectly apologize to everybody for being a week late. So here we are, and that actually gives us more to talk about because I've been asked to talk about the election, some implications of the election, and also to discuss a bit about the transition as we're heading from the Trump, whether the president wants to accept it or not, we're heading from one administration to another in just a matter of weeks. I should, of course, point out I don't represent the Naval War College or the Extension School or the US government or anybody else. These are just my personal views as a scholar. So what I thought what we would do, I would talk for maybe just 10 or 15 minutes, give you a basic overview of some of these issues. And I think for an audience like this one. I know that a lot of you have questions and want to get to that. So I think that would probably be the more productive way to go. So let me start by giving you the good news about 2020 and the election, which is that the elections happened when you consider the fact that we are in a pandemic at one of the most divided times in our country's history. This election came off remarkably well. I fully expected a lot more foreign chicanery and interference. Whether that interference was attempted or not, I'm not sure. I suspect that the U.S. agencies that do things like protect our election infrastructure and some of the others that are tasked with watching out for stuff like this actually did their jobs pretty well. I think also the public was probably a little more savvy than they were the last time around. One of my mantras after 2016, when people would say to me, "What can we do about, all this disinformation on Facebook?" I said, "Well, don't get your information from Facebook. That'd be a good start." And it seems like there were a fair number of people who actually took that to heart. The election was free and fair. And I also think 2016 was free and fair, to be honest with you, even though there was a lot of kind of toxic sludge dumped into the public square by our opponents overseas. I think, 2016 came out the way it did, 2020 came out the way it did, and in both cases, the United States electoral system functioned the way it's supposed to. This is one place, by the way, when people sometimes think that we ought to improve our elections by having the national government run them. This should be a reminder to everybody that having states and towns and localities in the best spirit of American federalism running these elections is the best safeguard there is against fraud, against intervention, against power outages, against sabotage. It's pretty hard to mess with an election that's being held in 50 states and thousands of towns across the United States. So that's really the very best news, is that even under circumstances of extreme duress, we had a record turnout. We had something like 60. Now, for my taste, that's still too low. 67% turnout isn't enough, but that's a pretty good turnout for an American presidential election. I think some of the other good news here is that the Trump campaign pretty much did what most of us expected that it would do, which was I think the president did everything he could to invalidate and kind of insulate himself against the loss by casting a lot of doubt on the election way ahead of time. I mean, this was just a replay of 2016, where the president said, "If I lose, it's rigged," and that he kind of put that message out over and over again. I think the good news is the Biden campaign didn't take any of that bait, and that the Biden campaign, in my view, actually ran a pretty good campaign, a pretty disciplined campaign, which I think is hard to do under any circumstances, but especially again in the middle of a pandemic. I think there was pretty good message discipline. I think the Democrats kept their usual circular firing squads to a minimum. The Republicans, I think, overestimated their strength and their ability to run on the president's personality. I mean, when you have a national convention and you don't bother adopting a platform, that even people that are on your side could potentially take that as kind of an insult. I don't think that went well for them. But I think, in the end, I will say the first presidential debate was a disgrace and an embarrassment to American democracy. And I'm not sure that we should have had two more after that, or even tried to have two more after that. But, somehow we pulled it off. Somehow we managed to get to Election Day without violence, without large-scale interference, without any gigantic technical failures, without massive foreign intervention. So I think, that's something we used to take all that for granted. But I think, at this point in the 21st century, we have to step back and say, not a bad outcome that we were able to pull this off. The bad news is, and this is my own partisan leanings speaking here, but 74 million people voted for Donald Trump under these circumstances, and I just find that disturbing. I wrote a piece in the Atlantic. I certainly can't. I will always level with you about how I feel about things. My students can tell you, and I wrote a piece in the Atlantic the day after the election saying 74 million people, nonetheless, 70 million people voted for a sociopath. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean that there are 70 million sociopaths in America and 70 million bad people and who agree with Donald Trump about everything. I think the bad news is, again, it's a sign of partisan division, tribalism, over-identification with parties, although there was a fair amount of ticket splitting, not as much, I think, as the Democrats hoped. A lot of people who voted for Trump obviously abandoned Donald Trump, but that really wasn't, I think it's a disturbing thing that the president's support wasn't softer than it was. What really did it is that the people who were motivated to vote against Donald Trump turned out in really large numbers. The president's supporters turned out in large numbers, but the president's opponents turned out in even bigger numbers. I think, too, the bad news is that we are again faced with the reality of an electoral system where even though Joe Biden was leading by 4 or 5 million votes, we were all kind of biting our nails about how that was going to turn out in the Electoral College. Now, I, for years, have defended the Electoral College as a symbol of American federalism. I think when you read the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and the founding, and you understand, I can already hear people saying, oh, it's just a remnant of slavery. Not quite. It was also a reminder that the president of the United States is chosen by the states and not by the people. This was an intentional, this was a design feature, not a bug, to not have the president chosen by a majority. And I still am uncomfortable with that, although I'm becoming increasingly interested in ideas like one floated in the 70s by both Democrats and Republicans at the time, that the popular vote should add an electoral college bonus of 102 votes. That is 2 for every state, and I can't remember where the other 2 come from. I think DC and somewhere else. But we have to do something. There's we can't have multiple elections where we're all sitting around saying, well, is the candidate who got 4 or 5 million extra votes really going to be the candidate who wins the election? I mean, we have to have some. I think it's okay to have one of those bizarre outcomes now and then. The near miss with Kennedy and Nixon, Bush v. Gore, where to this day I don't think anybody really knows who won Florida. To have 4 of those elections up through 2000, and then potentially to have 2 of them right next to each other in 2016 and 2020, I think is too much constitutional stress for any system to handle. And we're going to have to do something about that. So that's the good news. That's the bad news. The worst news is that American democracy is taking a serious hit at home and in the eyes of the world by a president who refuses to concede an election, which is, we've just never seen anything like this. I mean, this is literally unprecedented in 45 presidents. We've never had somebody that we have really had to ask the question whether we are going to have him dragged out of the White House at the last minute. Now, I don't think that'll happen. I think what the president's probably going to do is get on Air Force One like 2 minutes before the inauguration and fly to Florida. I called it a year ago that Trump would probably lose and then not go to the inauguration. This is really damaging for our democratic institutions. We are not having a peaceful transfer of power. The president is trying to motivate people to violence. He is casting doubt on all of our institutions. And he's going to leave a toxic residue behind him of millions of people who are never going to believe that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, when there is simply no question that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. This is a much larger scale of the problem in 2016, where I argued with a lot of people in the Democratic Party who said Trump didn't really win. The Russians hacked the vote, they hacked the machines, they changed totals. None of that happened. Donald Trump won the election in 2016. And the fact that there were still people who didn't believe it was bad for democracy. This is orders of magnitude worse, because the sitting president of the United States is basically saying that the electoral institutions in the United States don't work, and that they're not fair, and that elections here are, rigged by dark conspiracies of, Venezuelan communist Chi-Com voting, whatever the hell he's onto lately. I mean, we have people that were once respectable. We have a former national security advisor who's running around, spouting QAnon nonsense. We have members of Congress who are now outright conspiracy theorists. This is a bad place that we've been led to. Finally, I think we're seeing an orderly enough transition. As a former Republican, never Trumper, Biden voter, I'm happy about some of it. I'm not crazy about the rest of it. I think Joe Biden ran, as I said a moment ago, he ran a good campaign, and he did it primarily by avoiding places like Twitter and avoiding getting too tangled up with the left wing of his own party. I think some of that's coming unraveled now. I was very heartened early on when he chose Blinken. He chose Avril Haines to be the DNI, the National Intelligence Officer. When he chose Janet Yellen at Treasury, these are sensible. Jake Sullivan as National Security Advisor. That would have been a bet that would have made you no money in Vegas, because everybody saw that coming. The first misstep for me was Lloyd Austin as Secretary of Defense. I think that's a bad idea. I cannot think of a single one of my colleagues who studies civil military relations as I do, who thinks this is a good idea. Another 4-star general within 4 years needing another waiver from Congress is a really bad idea. It's bad for the country. It's bad for the Defense Department. It's bad for civil military relations. I was hoping that he was going to go with Michelle Flournoy. I think the Secretary, the Defense Department is drastically overdue for a female leader who can change some of the culture in the DoD. And that was the first kind of chill I got, that maybe the transition wasn't going to go as well as I was hoping. I don't understand the picks that have been made. I'm kind of holding my breath on Attorney General at this point. I don't understand the picks that have been made. I don't know why Jennifer Granholm is going to the Energy Department. She doesn't have that background. I don't know why Pete Buttigieg is going to transportation. He has no background in this. I have no idea why Dennis McDonough, who is not a veteran, as far as I know, I could be wrong about that, but has no real experience with military or veterans affairs, is heading to become the head of the VA, which is one of the most dysfunctional, sprawling, bureaucratic messes in Washington, and always has been. I just can't. I can't make sense of those picks, and I think that this, to me, says the incoming Biden team has already kind of lost its focus. They're getting bogged down in, trying to make diversity picks, but without really thinking about matching people to the appropriate agencies. I mean, it would be crazy for any Democratic administration to ignore Jennifer Granholm, who is a very effective communicator. Pete Buttigieg has his fans, good communicator, could probably, I would have, if it were up to me, I would have put Buttigieg as ambassador to NATO or something to put him in a foreign policy position. But I don't understand what the incoming Biden team is doing now. And I'm not sure they understand what they're doing. There may be some inner logic behind this, but I'm a little worried about it, because I think what America needs right now is a kind of government of national salvation. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We have just weathered an existential crisis. We're in the middle of a deep constitutional crisis, again, with a president who simply refuses to concede an election. And I would have liked to have seen more seriousness in some of these other picks. One thing I will caution everybody about, because you see this on social media, Twitter, Facebook, places like that, it's okay if Joe Biden, and I've said this many times on social media, It's okay if Joe Biden picks people you've never heard of. This is not, someone on Twitter had a great line. We're not casting a Marvel movie here. We're not trying to create a team of superheroes. This needs to be a wonky, competent, nose to the grindstone team. And just, when it comes to, apparently Biden's thinking about Doug Jones as Attorney General. Okay, well, there are a lot of people. I think Doug Jones would be perfectly credible Attorney General, but it doesn't need to be him or Sally Yates or Eric Holder or some celebrity that you think is going to, become the Incredible Hulk and levy vengeance. I think I'll just finish my comments by saying this, and then I'll get to your questions. I think what we really need now in America is boring. We need boring competence. We don't need any more drama. We don't need any more flashy celebrities. We don't need people that have been on Fox. We don't need people whose primary mode of communication is through the television. What we really need are people that are going to go into all these departments that have been a complete dumpster fire for 4 years and kind of set things right and get the country back on its feet. And so I'm kind of holding my breath about the rest of Biden's picks, particularly Attorney General, after the damage that William Barr has done to the Justice Department, where I think that is truly one of the grave problems that is being left in the wake of this administration. So let me stop there, get to your questions, and let's have a conversation.
Great. Thank you, Tom. There are just so many great questions in the Q&A, and I encourage all of you, if you have extras, to pop them on in there. Tom, there's quite a few that reference the fundraising that Trump is doing now to his political action committee. He has roughly $200 million he's raising, and people are wondering what the implications of that are. Can you speak to that in any way?
Yeah, I'm not one of the people worried about Trump running again in 2024. I think he's just trying to line his pockets. I think he's just fleecing the last nickels and dimes out of the loyalists. He may even declare for 2024. If you think about it, there's a lot of reasons for him to do that. It keeps money. He's broke. You have to remember, Donald Trump is broke. I mean, he is broke and he's in legal trouble. So, dangling this thing about I'm going to be a candidate in 2024 not only keeps money from suckers flowing into his pockets, it also lets him fire back at any possible prosecutions at the state level of saying they're just after me because I'm running for president again. It gives him a built-in excuse for all of the things that he doesn't want to end up in court for, because the people who want Trump prosecuted for his crimes in office, we tried that. It's called impeachment. Mm-hmm. He survived it. He has been acquitted. That's done. That's, as the saying goes, that's the way that one went. Where he's going to still be in trouble is in places like New York State, where he's been fleecing the tax system for years. There are people in his circle who could end up doing time in New York State prison for clowning around with their taxes. And he'll want to be able to say, well, this is just because I'm running for president. A couple of things to think about with that. One is there are Republicans who have been biting their tongues and holding their fire and declaring their loyalty to Donald Trump because they're waiting for it to be their time. And they are not going to keep biting their tongues. For Nikki Haley and Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley are not going to carry 4 more years of water and then potentially have to sit out 4 more years on top of that. These are ruthless, ambitious people. And you can bet that when the leaks begin about all the terrible things, you think we know terrible things about Donald Trump now, wait 6 months. And most of those leaks will come from other Republicans who want to bury this entire political family and get them out of the way, because the toll Donald Trump has taken on the Republican Party is immense. And they're going to, like I said, I don't think Nikki Haley or Tom Cotton or anybody else is going to say, oh, Donald Trump wants to run again? Okay, fine. I'll just sit down and be quiet for another 4 years and nod politely for another 4 years. I don't think that's going to happen at all. And I think even with the polling you're seeing, people saying, yeah, he should run again. Some of that's just partisan, anger right now. That will dissipate. Republicans are going to be looking for other people. So he's fundraising because that's what he does. because, this is like Trump Stakes and Trump University and Trump the Game and the Art of the Deal. He vacuums money out of the pockets of gullible people, and that's not going to stop.
Mhm. Great. Several lines of questions along the lines of battling hyperpartisanship in the public as well as in Congress. Do you have any thoughts on how to unite and move forward for the Biden administration?
Well, I think, part of the I think part of the disappointment for Democrats in 2020 was how many down ballot Democrats got clobbered. Democrats are going to have to unite with themselves before they can unite the country. I think the Democrats have to face an internal reckoning about whether the future of the party is going to be, Abigail Spanberger and Connor Lamb, or two moderate congressmen who came in 2018, or whether it's going to be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I think Democrats really, at their peril, underestimate how badly they were hurt by things like defund the police and by people who were in pandemic lockdowns and couldn't go to weddings or funerals while there were Democratic politicians applauding tens of thousands of people marching in the streets for Black Lives Matter in the summer. Now, I don't disagree with the justice of the cause. I am speaking to you as a matter of raw political strategy. So I think the first task here is that you cannot count on the Republicans for anything. That is a broken, psychotic party now. And I think the only answer is they have to just be defeated over and over again and driven into the wilderness. I'll say more about that in a minute. But for Democrats to do that credibly and to put the country back together, they have to be a credible governing party. And that means being a governing majority. And that means learning how to live in a coalition and manage a coalition rather than, simply believing that 2020, which was really a referendum on Donald Trump, was somehow an approval of the most extreme positions of the left, because that is not what happened. There's a very good data nerd guy who worked for Obama named David Shore, who said, look, elections now are nationalized. It used to be that the things you could say in one congressional district, you could shoot your mouth off in a D+55 district in New York City, and it wasn't going to hurt the Democrat running in, the greater Pittsburgh area. Well, those days are over. Republicans learned this long ago, which is why they were effective at message discipline and better party discipline. Democrats are going to have to realize that if they're going to be a governing majority, they're going to have to be a coherent governing majority. Now, the other thing about the Republicans going to the wilderness is there are going to be Republicans elected to Congress. It's going to look, I actually think the Democrats are going to lose the House in 2022 because of their internal problems. I suspect it's quite possible that we will be facing unified Republican government again in 2024 because of the way the map is drawn, because of the cycles, and because without Donald Trump, the Democrats don't have as effective a message. Donald Trump's one of the best things that ever happened to the Democrats in that sense. And so the real question here is, what future I have checked out of the Republican Party. I want no part of it. I won't vote for anybody that potentially could caucus with Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell. But in some districts, I think it's very important for people to pay attention to primaries. If there is a non-crazy young Republican coming in to unseat one of the old kooks, then, vote in that primary. I mean, that is how parties replenish themselves. That's not really an issue for me. I live in an entirely Democratic state, but if I were in a swing state, I'd be paying really close attention to Republican primaries, and I'd be looking to think of it this way: Steve King from Iowa, one of the worst members of Congress, a racist, just a horrible human being. When people noticed him, he got picked off in a primary by another Republican. You weren't going to replace Steve King with a Democrat, but you did have the shot at replacing him with somebody who isn't Steve King. So that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, along that same vein of polarization is disinformation. And someone asks, what is the media's responsibility and role in addressing disinformation, and how do media institutions, clean up their act and start giving unbiased, fact-based information?
Well, this is where I'm going to be Professor Buzzkill and your cranky uncle at the Thanksgiving table and tell you to stop blaming the media. The reason our information space is such a hot mess is because we like it that way as consumers. We are getting exactly what we have asked for. We like gladiatorial fights. We like interesting reality TV. We like having our views confirmed endlessly. If you really want to understand how bad the problem has gotten, a few years back, I was giving a talk. I was on a panel, and one of the other panelists was Dan Baltz of the Washington Post, very senior editor at the Post. And someone stood up and asked this very question: "You in the media, you should help us. Why don't you write more analytical pieces and explainers that give the facts?" And Dan, without flinching, nodded and he said, "We do write them. You won't read them." And if you want to know how they know this, if you've ever been inside a modern newsroom, like the Washington Post or the New York Times, they literally have gigantic, it looks like a NASA command center. They know exactly what articles you're reading in their paper. They know how long you're dwelling on it. They know how many pages of it you've read. They know which, anybody who's ever run a website knows this. What their bounce rate is. They write analytical explainer pieces in the major papers all the time. And you know what, you guys, the American public, all of you, too long, didn't read, boring, don't want it. Now, I'm not going to play the both sides equivalents. Fox and OAN and Newsmax they're the toxic waste dumpers of the media environment. But I've gotten in trouble and I've gotten all kinds of hate mail because I don't particularly like the way Rachel Maddow's show is structured. Her show is structured a lot like a Fox show. It's a big wind up. Stephen Colbert, if you haven't seen it, Stephen Colbert did a parody of Maddow that was perfect. It's a big wind up. It's teasing you with secret information and you're going to find stuff out and you're in the know. All of these shows are celebrity driven, making you feel like you are participants in a special tribe, whether you're hanging with Cuomo or whether Rachel is unpacking the secrets for you, or whether Hannity is telling you that the Chinese communists are stealing the election. The cure for all of this is to read a newspaper for 45 minutes a day. That's it. That's all you have to do. And people inevitably say to me, "Well, I don't have time to do that." Well, you have time to sit in front of the TV all night. You have time to watch a football game. You have time to, I'm not going to make fun of people who play game. I'm a gamer. I'm a computer gamer. You have time to get the level 50 on Fallout, just like I do. We all have time, but it's boring and it's not fun and it's not interesting and it doesn't make us feel affirmed. So my answer is stop blaming. Yes, there are media polluters out there. There are bad actors in the media sphere, but you are human beings with agency. You are human beings who have responsibility. To say that, it's the media's problem, to me, this is like blaming McDonald's because you're obese and have diabetes. Well, they have all these milkshakes and I just had to drink them. No, you didn't. No, you don't have to drink them. And that's the same thing with the media. And let me just head off one question I know always comes up, because for years people have said to me, "Well, shouldn't the government do something like a fairness doctrine?" Folks, the fairness doctrine didn't matter even when it existed. It was passed in the 40s because we were worried about the scarce resource of airwaves over television before cable. When airwaves were assigned, like some of you are too young to remember this, but Channel 3 was assigned to broadcast on Channel 3. Those were publicly owned airwaves. That's long gone. The fairness doctrine was never enforced. Nobody cared about it. it can't come back. It would never apply to cable. It can't apply to the internet. The only people who can control this are you, sitting right here, making decisions to be better informed consumers of the news.
Right. I love that you level with us and tell us how you're feeling all the time. It's great.
I'll stop holding back.
Yeah, no, please don't. There are a couple of questions along the line of structural problems. You said it yourself, the lines are drawn. Voter suppression is out there. How do you combat that redistricting and the voter suppression?
Show up. That's how you combat it. First of all, the Republicans engage in voter suppression tactics because they think they work, but in fact, they only work in low turnout marginal elections. As we learned in 2018 and 2020, when people show up in anything like reasonable numbers, I mean like 60%, the suppression isn't that effective. And in part, Republicans worry about it because they are becoming a demographic minority, and they think that somehow this is like a rabbit's foot for them, that they think if they just do this, it's going to save them. It's not going to save them, especially if people show up for elections. Let me say something to young people in particular. You're the problem. If the 18 to 25, 18 to 30-year-old voters all showed up in anything like 50 or 60% rates, Democratic Party would control everything tomorrow. The youth vote is patting itself on the back this time around for getting up to 49%. Look, the older folks, not just the boomers, old people, what's left of the silent majority, the boomers, even the aging Xers, they outvote the young people. And this has been going on since the 70s. So this isn't like some new voter suppression, voter ID. Like from the time the voting age was raised to 18, the crappiest turnout is always the youngest people. The other thing that, I'm not sure what to do about gerrymandering, except to remind you all that gerrymandering is a bipartisan activity. And one of the reasons, remember, Massachusetts invented it. It's named after a governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry. I believe his name was Gary, so I think we're supposed to call it gerrymandering. But gerrymandering was a happy bipartisan event, and part of the reason Democrats were happy to participate in it, gerrymandering is an ugly business because you can create, for example, a safe, as happened in Georgia in 1980, you can create a safe majority minority district that will elect an African-American representative. What you're doing is you're creating 3 safe white conservative districts around it. I don't know what to do about that because that's controlled by state legislatures by our Constitution. Now, maybe we can have some kind of Supreme Court challenge that finally says this is a 14th Amendment violation. Hopefully we'll get there at some point. But the other thing I will tell people is the reason the Republicans have disproportionately gotten better at this over the past 25 years is because the Republicans are the ones who show up for state and local elections. Now, there's a really good book by a Columbia professor named Mark Lilla, who is a liberal, called The Once and Future Liberal. And Lilla makes the point that Democrats have become obsessed with the presidency. He says they have daddy issues with the presidency, where they think if they just elect a president, that's enough and daddy fixes everything. Republicans have been highly disciplined about showing up. I mean, if it's an election for dog catcher, Republicans show up. When you look at places like Seattle or New York City, and Democratic primaries have 8, 10, 12, 14% turnout, Republicans just don't do. Republicans show up for primaries. They push for the most right-wing guy they can get. Then they take whoever they get who has an R on their name. They show up in the off-year elections. As soon as Democrats can learn to do that, the whole complexion of the country is going to change. But until Democrats decide to start showing up for off-year state-level elections, Republicans are going to control state legislatures. Think of it this way. By the time Trump won in 2016, the Republicans were the majority party in a majority of states at every level of government. That wasn't because of gerrymandering. It's not because of suppression. It's because they show up. It's because they vote, and they vote in everything. And I know because I was one of those voters and I worked for a Republican, and the fact that Republicans show up and vote for Republicans instead of having, food fights about which faction of the Democratic Party should win this 12% turnout. They're just more disciplined at this. And I think Democrats are just going to have to get better at it.
Yeah, there are a number of questions along the line of, I guess, cataloging damage done at the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the judiciary. Any thoughts really in what keeps you up at night, and things that are lost that might be very difficult to rebuild?
I think when it comes to foreign policy, the tragic thing, I always think of the Trump administration as a time where, with our allies, where we've now proven that we're capable of being crazy. Think of it as you have a best friend or a significant other or a spouse, and they've never hit you. And finally, your best friend loses his temper and punches you, or your significant other slaps you. Even if it never happens again and they feel terrible, we're so sorry. Now it's a possibility. Or it's like cheating on somebody, right? I mean, once you've been cheated on, you say, oh, it'll never happen again. Well, it happened once. And I think our allies feel that way. It's like, we never really thought you were capable of going this far off the ledge. And we're glad you're back. But now we know you're capable of being nuts. And I think if Trump had been in power for 4 more years, it would have been the end of American democracy. It would have been the end of America's position in the world. It would have been the end of NATO and a lot of our other alliances. I think that damage, some of that damage, is irreversible. Because, again, we're the spouse who hit somebody or cheated or blew through the life savings or ran off to Vegas with the mortgage money once. And we've proven that we can do it now. Domestically, I'm really worried. And by the way, in terms of foreign policy, Trump's not out of office yet. We still have, looking at the calendar, we still have a month, 5 weeks, where Donald Trump can do something catastrophically dangerous, including start a war. So I'm not counting any chickens yet. Donald Trump is still the commander in chief and still has sole possession of the nuclear codes to the strategic arsenal of the United States. That makes me lose sleep every night. Domestically, the greatest damage, I think, has been in 2 areas. One, to the Justice Department. I think Donald Trump was poisonous to the rule of law, and I think Barr was just fired, and I almost wonder if Barr wanted to get fired to kind of launder his own reputation. Like, oh, I was willing to crap all over the rule of law, but look, even I got fired, so I'm not so bad. It's almost like at the end of the Trump administration, getting fired is kind of like your way of saying, well, I wasn't a total toad. But I'm not buying it. I think Bill Barr was one of the most destructive. He was in some ways, he was worse than Trump himself, because Barr knew what he was doing. Barr specifically undermined the rule of law in this country, using his position as Attorney General. And I think his name deserves to be spoken with ignominy and disgust. Of course, Barr always says, oh, I'm 68, I'm going to die, I don't care. Well, he doesn't care how history remembers him, but I do. And I think he's truly one of the great villains of this administration. But a place that's less often talked about is that Trump did a huge amount of damage to American civil-military relations. He tried desperately to politicize the military. He tried to appeal to the military as a political force. This is something that is completely out of bounds in American politics. He tried to mobilize the military as a political force. He wanted to drag the military into elections to the point where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had to say, I want to remind everyone that we serve the Constitution. When the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has to remind the commander in chief that the military serves the Constitution, you are in a de facto civil military crisis. The other thing, and this is even a kind of less thought about part of the less considered problem of civil military relations, is that for 2 years, the way that we solved this problem was to have Jim Mattis, a 4-star general, run the Defense Department basically as an independent kingdom in isolation. Like people say, well, don't worry about Trump. Jim Mattis is in charge over at the Pentagon. That is completely un-American. It is completely anti-constitutional. You know, when the president calls the Secretary of Defense and says, I want to bomb Syria, or I want to, you know, do something, even if it's wrong, the correct answer from the United States Department of Defense is, okay, Mr. President, I'd like to talk to you about, you know, why we shouldn't do this, but your orders are your orders, and the military obeys your orders. Congress is the place where that's supposed to stop, not in the Pentagon. And instead, what you had is, if you read Bob Woodward's book, Trump calls the Pentagon, says, I want to do this. And Jim Mattis says, thank you for your interest in national defense, Mr. President, hangs up the phone. I hope you all understand how immensely dangerous that is. Think about that if Joe Biden picks up the phone and says, listen, Lloyd, you know, there's some things I need done. You know, this is my policy. This is the military action I want to take or not undertake, or, you know, the changes I want to make. And a retired general says, yeah, whatever, Joe. You don't want, I mean, we all thought it was great because it was Mattis keeping Trump out of his hair and keeping Trump away from things that go boom. But if once you set that as a precedent, you have created an immensely dangerous precedent. And I think that's why I didn't want Austin at defense. I don't want another general at defense. I want a civilian at defense who can say, you know, Mr. President, I'm not here to take your orders. I'll resign. I'll go to Congress. I will testify in front of the Senate. If you want to do this crazy thing, you'll have to fire me, and I'll go tell the Senate Armed Services Committee why I think you're doing something bad. And then, you know, we can all have this out in public. Instead, Mattis said, and this is why I don't admire Jim Mattis. Mattis said, well, I'm just going to keep all this on the down low, and I'm just not going to do it. And let's not have any, you know, ruffling of the. That's not how civil military relations works in a democracy. Totally unhealthy.
Oh, that's troubling. Okay, quite a number of questions on the international front. Any thoughts on the China policy of the Trump administration, and if that is going to kind of hamstring the Biden administration, or the Middle East, the Iran nuclear deal, that sort of thing?
What China policy? I mean, this is the problem with the Trump administration, is that there were multiple policies. Mike Pompeo has a policy. You know, Tom Cotton has a policy. The guys at, you know, over lunch at the Pentagon canteen had a policy. Donald Trump had no policies. Trump had reactions. He had, you know, kind of gut instincts that were always about protecting Donald Trump. If you ask me what the China policy is, I can't answer. I don't know what it is. It's start a trade war and then apologize to President Xi and talk about what a great guy he is, except that COVID was his fault, but I like him because he's a good fella. There is no there. We have been functioning without a real president for 4 years when it comes to any kind of policy. The only place where Donald Trump has had a completely consistent foreign policy is in his abject fear of Russia. His complete, I have argued all along, I said it years ago, I wrote a piece in Politico. I think Donald Trump, the people who have said Donald Trump is a Russian agent you're out of your mind. You're off the ledge. I mean, you know, it doesn't work that way. Vladimir Putin doesn't call up Donald Trump every day and say, no, remember, Donald, destroy NATO by noon. You know, Trump is up to his eyeballs in all kinds of illegal transactions with Russian oligarchs for 30 years, meaning that the Russians know every dirty deal he's ever done. That makes Trump innately cautious about pissing off the Russians ever, in the way that you're always innately cautious about annoying anybody who knows all your dirtiest secrets. They don't have to give him orders. He's afraid of them on principle because he knows that they know what he knows about himself. There were a lot of people who defended General Flynn, for example, saying, well, so he lied about talking to the Russian ambassador. The problem with all of these guys is that lying about your deals with the Russians is that the Russians know that you're lying, and that makes you compromised. That puts you in the position where you are terrified that the Russians can blow the whistle on you for lying. Even if they never do it, I'm sure, and I'm seeing we have a couple of hundred people participating here. If any of you have ever held a security clearance, that's why huge debts and foreign entanglements are a security clearance problem. Not because you're a Chinese agent or in the pocket of the Iranians, but because it makes you vulnerable to pressure that you start policing yourself about what you may or may not do. And I think that Donald Trump has been compromised for years, and I think he's terrified of the Russians. That has been the only foreign policy constant in 4 years. The rest of it, he has no idea what he's doing. Let me back up and say the other problem with Donald Trump on foreign policy, Donald Trump never expected to win in 2016. And I think if you start from the realization that for Trump this whole thing was a prank and a scam right from the beginning, then you understand why there was no coherent policy, why he hired people that had all these ethical hot messes that they couldn't clean up because nobody expected to be in government. Flynn apparently said to somebody one time something like, this was I want to say it was in a piece in the New Yorker, but he was supposedly said something like, someone said, your Russia connections, that's a real problem. And he said, yeah, it would be a problem if we were winning, but we're not going to win. Well, I think Trump took the same position. And then when he won, was in this. So now, he had no consistent position on the Middle East. He's had no consistent position on China. He does things that some conservatives applaud, like killing Soleimani, because it's his inner circle says, if you do this, Dad, it'll be good for you. You'll get a bump in the ratings. Because remember, for him, it's all a TV show. So I think Biden is going to face, to come back to the question, and then I'll shut up about this. Biden is going to face a problem, which is that America's enemies have had a free ride for 4 years. This thing about the Iran deal, Jill, I think you said somebody asked about the Iran deal. The Iranians were more than happy to have Trump dump the Iran deal. They got what they wanted on the front end. And now Trump is saying, the whole rest of the world is saying, please, Iran, don't let the Americans get to you about this. And the Iranians are saying, well, we were the aggrieved party. We tried, and the Americans are the ones who did this. So now we're going to be the ones enriching uranium, and it's not our fault. And the rest of you need to keep, kissing our ass because the Americans blew this. I was actually against the Iran deal early on. But once we were in it, there was no way out of it. To me, the Iran deal was like getting into a speeding car. Once we took off, you don't jump out of the car at 60 miles an hour. And that's what Trump, so I just think Biden's going to have, I think that's why I was the happiest about Blinken and Haynes and Sullivan, because I think these are people that are competent and know what they're doing, and we're going to need all of that.
Great. While we were on the subject of Russia, we've had someone ask about the cyber attack. Any thoughts on the most recent national security cyber attack and what we know, the ramifications, sort of thing?
There is evidence of my hypothesis, right? We've had this gigantic Russian cyber attack, and we have had absolute silence from the White House about it. Trump does not dare say anything about this. Because it's also the Russians. I'm sure partly it's their way of saying we're gonna hack the Department of Energy and your nuclear weapons labs. And by the way, just remember what we have that we can dump on the internet anytime we feel like it, Don. The other thing I think the Russians did was to do this right in the divot between the two administrations to say, the candy store is open until January 20th. let's shoot for everything we can get as quickly as we can get it, because Trump isn't going to hold us accountable, and Trump is not going to cooperate with Biden. He's made it clear there is no security cooperation. We are not having a seamless transition. That's why this is such a threat to our national security, that the Russians and the Chinese and everybody else are saying, hey, America is like a country, a guy with two halves of his brain that aren't hooked up anymore. And so, January 20th, we'll just call it ollie oxen free, because the Biden people are going to come in. They're going to have to start all over again, because Trump's guys aren't going to tell them anything about this. So, it was perfectly wrong. I mean, the Russians are always a very hard-nosed, highly sensible, power country that understands the exercise of power, and hitting us right in the middle of the succession crisis was smart. It was smart on their part. And Donald Trump is to blame for it, in my opinion.
That's great. I love this question, really. Should we be worried about the Supreme Court?
Well, if you're a liberal and you want liberal principles affirmed out of the Supreme Court, kind of capital L liberal principle, you ought to be worried. There's a 6-3 conservative majority on the court. I think the fact that everything Trump sent to the Supreme Court in the past few months got laughed out, including by Amy Coney Barrett, should tell you that there are limits, and that this is why it's good that Supreme Court justices are lifetime appointments, because now they can go and say, well, we're not running for anything. Trump can't reappoint us to anything. So, the fact that these things are basically, someone had a great line that the Supreme Court's last decision on Trump's election suit was basically, I think Saturday Night Live said their response was basically an eye roll emoji. It was, like first time in Supreme Court history that the decision was rendered as an eye roll emoji. Worried about the Supreme Court? Yeah, the Supreme Court is not going to be a friend to voting rights. It's not going to be a friend to greater justice and equality in this country. It's certainly not going to be a friend to those of you who are pro-choice about abortion restrictions. But I also think it's a Supreme Court, like all Supreme Courts, that understand the limits of what is possible in a country that has changed as much. I personally don't believe that abortion is ever going to be outlawed in the United States. I know, the Handmaid's Tale cosplayers and all that stuff, but this is the same Supreme Court where Anthony Kennedy, who was appointed by Ronald Reagan, gave the impassioned speech about why gay people can get married. Things change over time. I think, even Reagan, back 35 years ago, somebody asked him, they were driving during campaign events, and, you really going to outlaw abortion? And he said, do I look crazy to you? There are limits. I think the bigger problem is going to be on things like voting rights, representation, women's rights, the availability of abortion, not the legality of abortion, restrictions on abortion. It's not a Supreme Court that I left the Republican Party finally once and for all when Susan Collins defended Brett Kavanaugh. That drove me out. Brett Kavanaugh does not belong on the Supreme Court. Amy Coney Barrett, she's the nominee that sooner or later some Republican president was going to get to. Neil Gorsuch, completely ordinary Republican appointee. Any Republican president would have put Neil Gorsuch on the bench. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a 6-3, and frankly, if Biden, I'm hoping that Breyer, or others don't make the mistake Ruth Bader Ginsburg makes and says, well, it's going to be Democratic presidents from here on out. I think you're going to have a Republican president in 2024. If there are older people on the Supreme Court thinking about retiring, now is the time.
Right. That's a great point. You mentioned leaving the GOP. Where do you see the GOP going forward? Where does that party go next?
The GOP cares about nothing but power now. They're not, for all of the crazy talk about QAnon and, the militia the institutional GOP. When you want to understand the future of the GOP looks like Mitch McConnell, even though McConnell's 178 years old or whatever he is. It's about tax cuts for wealthy people, judges on federal courts that will make business and kind of white minority rule friendly appointments and staying in power. The thing to understand about Republican political elected politicians right now is that they like being elected politicians. If you really want to understand Josh Hawley or Tom Cotton, these guys went to Harvard, and their attitude is, I'm not going back to Arkansas. And if saying crazy stuff is what keeps me living in DC, Josh Hawley is from Missouri. He doesn't even have a home in Missouri anymore. Lives in Northern Virginia. These guys are going to say and do whatever it takes to always make sure that enough people back in their home states vote for them. So I don't see the GOP going anywhere until a new generation. I think I was hoping for a big blue wave in 2020, and I'm going to blame the Democrats for some of why it didn't happen. But I think that the Republican National Committee needs a house cleaning, and I think there need to be new Republican faces at levels of government. And I want to hammer this again from 20 minutes ago, where they go into places like city councils and state houses as the future farm team of a center-right party that might still have the Republican name, but is a healthier, recovered party. All of as far as I'm concerned, all of the people that are in it now have been tainted by their enabling of Trump, and they all have to go. So where does the Republican Party go? It could go right back into a majority, a cynical, power-holding majority, unless Democrats get their act together.
Right. Well, getting back to key issues, there is a comment from an anonymous attendee that says that I live in a Trump state and watch so many people lose their jobs, retirement, homes, and cars. They may never be able to own homes again or retire. These people did not benefit from voting for an established candidate, so they voted for Trump. How can America change so that these people's concerns are addressed?
Well, this goes back to a famous book that was written about 20 years ago called What's the Matter with Kansas? A liberal writer named Tom Frank asked the question, why is it that poor people in Kansas keep voting for the wealthy Republicans who keep grinding them into the dust? Mm-hmm. And my answer is there's nothing. I'm sorry, and I don't know what state you live in. I don't think there's anything to be done about it. I think this is a demographic change where those voters are literally going to age and die voting the same way over and over and over again, because they have now, they have adopted the cultural identity that says Republicans are the virtuous, God-fearing, patriotic people, and Democrats are socialist, abortion-loving, drag queen communists. And you're not going to talk them out of that. They will go. It's like the people who thought COVID was a hoax, who are literally dying in hospitals, still believing they don't have COVID. So I don't know that there's anything you can do about those people except outvote them, because they will constantly vote to put themselves into misery. Mitch McConnell is the senior senator from Kentucky. He's the Senate Majority Leader. Kentucky is no one has benefited from voting for Republicans in Kentucky. No poor people in Kentucky are better off because of a gigantic tax cut that mostly benefited, well, on the edge benefited me, but only benefited people vastly more wealthy than I am. And yet, Mitch McConnell beat his last challenger like a drum, like by 25 points, 20 points. Like they thought she was going to win because they shaved, his margin was shrinking to like 10 points. You are not going to stop people from voting against their own interest, because their cultural identity has become completely absorbed by the notion that the Republicans are the party of Jesus and patriotism and saving the babies. And I don't know what else. I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer for you. You have people losing their farms over this tariff war who are like, well, it's not the president's fault. Well, it is the president's fault. Mm-hmm. And they're just never going to believe it, because the other thing to understand about these voters, being wrong is worse than dying. It's worse than being broke. It's worse than losing your farm. They cannot accept the cognitive dissonance of having done this to themselves.
Hmm. No, yeah.
As sad as that is, I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't.
Yeah, well, it's getting on the hour. Thank you, Tom. You've been very generous with your time. There are a whole lot of other questions, but we can take a few more. Any thoughts on Georgia with the Senate election
I,
for grabs?
in any earlier time, I would have said the two Republicans are going to win it easily. It's hard to get Democrats to vote, and it's hard to get Democrats to vote twice. On the other hand, you have kooks running around Georgia saying to other Republicans, don't vote because it's all rigged. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how that turns out. So flip a coin. I think, anything could happen. I think it's more likely that Loeffler loses than Warnock. But, John Ossoff is not a great candidate. Warnock's a better candidate. And Perdue and Loeffler are awful, but there have been so many freakish events in this. I just didn't think there'd be people running around saying, don't vote in the Republican primary because it's like been rigged by the Venezuelans. So I'm sorry, on Georgia, I got nothing.
Okay, great. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement in the Lincoln Project and other sort of anti-Trumpers and where they
Sure.
go from here? Is there a next step for the Lincoln Project?
Well, with the proviso that I'm not a founder of Lincoln Project and I don't get paid by them. I don't represent them. I'm just an unpaid volunteer advisor. I think what the Lincoln Project's going to keep doing. I just hosted a show today. You can find it on our YouTube channel on Lincoln Project TV. We were asked this question, and it's our 1-year anniversary today. I think the Lincoln Project mission was to do Trump and Trumpism. And I think that's become expanded now. Tara Setmeyer is a Lincoln Project advisor as well. And she said, I'm no longer a Republican. I'm part of the pro-democracy movement. And I think that's what you're going to see the Lincoln Project doing. The Lincoln Project's going to go after Mitch McConnell. It's going to go after, these Trump enablers who are going to try and launder their reputations and come back out of the woodwork into power. But I think also going to try and shoot for a more positive message about how we, kind of find what's best in ourselves again about Americans after 4 years of American carnage and all this other disgusting, pessimism from Donald Trump. The Lincoln Project isn't going anywhere. They are going to keep hammering. I mean, there are liberals actually who wish we would go away because they think we're some kind of Trojan horse for Republican restoration. I mean, most of us wouldn't be safe walking into Republican headquarters at this point, but whatever. I think what we're really going to do is just I think you shouldn't underestimate the degree to which we all bonded over the idea that whatever our other political differences, we all believe in the rule of law and the Constitution. And that's what we decided was important, much more than any one policy of the right or left. We decided that the Constitution and the rule of law and American democracy was the most important thing.
Great. Well, we can shift back to the positive. There are a number of questions about how do we build unity? How do we start talking to Trump supporters or Biden supporters if you're in one camp or the other? And how do you really build bridges?
Yeah, I'm a minority on this among the never Trumpers. If you voted for Trump in 2016, I understand. I was going to vote for third party back in those days, and I finally voted for Clinton as a kind of a popular vote approach because I knew it would drive him crazy to lose the popular vote. If you voted for Trump in 2020, reluctantly or with anguish, I can still talk to you and say, I think you made a bad choice, but maybe. To me, the place to part company with a lot of my friends and the never is, if you enthusiastically voted for Donald Trump in 2020, I'm not interested in a conversation with you. I'm not interested in bridges. I'm interested in you understanding that you've done something wrong, that you've made a morally impoverished choice, that you have enabled sedition against the United States of America, and that I can't talk to you about that. That's got to be between you and your conscience. And I think trying to placate people who will never accept this is a waste of time. I think the most important thing is that people in the center need to reach out to each other. And this is a message as much to my friends who are Democrats as it is to my former Republican friends. Stop purity testing each other. Stop saying, well, but for, like, I don't have strong feelings about abortion, but everybody else does. But for your position on abortion, I could cooperate with. But for your position on, opioid addiction, I could cooperate with you. I'm gonna leave everybody with a comment by Ronald Reagan, who said, somebody who's on your side 80% of the time is an ally, not an enemy. Not an enemy because they're not on your side 20% of the time. It's time for a coalition. If we agree on the big stuff, the Bill of Rights, regular elections, the rule of law, a free press, hey, we can fight out all the other stuff later. But I think on this, I think former Republicans have to get over, they're the ones that have been poisoned by that bad information sphere. And as I tell people, I can talk to you, I tell some of my more sensible conservative friends, we can't have a conversation until you turn off Fox. I'm not going to compete with Tucker Carlson, not doing it. But if you do that, then we can talk. I think for my friends who are Democrats, stop with the purity testing. Stop doing it to yourselves. Stop doing it among the Democrats, and certainly stop doing it across the aisle. Someone said to me the other day, I know you're a member of the Lincoln Project, but you don't really agree with Democrats on hardly anything. And I'm like, of course I don't. I'm a small government, low tax, federalist kind of guy, but I agree with you about the Constitution. I agree with you about democracy. I agree with you about equality and justice before the law. So stop trying to figure out where I am on marginal tax rates. That's a fight we can have all day, any other time. So that to me is how you build unity. Go to the center, accept that you're going to get everything you want. Stop, irascible children about thinking that every election is the last. Republicans and Democrats both have this disease of saying, if I just win a big enough election, it's over for the other guys. It's not over. America is always going to have conservatives and liberals. Every country does. So take that spirit of citizenship and say, as long as you and I agree on the Constitution, as long as you and I agree on the rule of law, as long as you agree that, we are all equal before the bar of justice, hey, we can fight about tax rates all day. But let's fight now against the guys who don't think we should have free elections. Let's fight now with the people who don't think the press should be free of government interference. Let's fight right now among people who don't want to count the votes of Black people. These are easy calls to make that can create unity as long as we get over this childish insistence that, well, I would have worked with you, but you don't support Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, we have bigger problems than that right now.
Yes. Bigger fish to fry.
Much bigger fish to fry.
Yes. Well, we have kind of a fun question. I wondered if you would like to explain that chessboard hanging in your background.
Oh yeah, that chessboard was sent to me at the beginning of the Never Trump movement. It is inscribed, "Keep fighting the good fight," and it is signed by Garry Kasparov, the Russian dissident and chess champion and one of the greatest players in history of the game. So that is signed by one of the greatest chess masters in history, with an inspirational message to keep fighting for democracy and justice, both in Russia and in the United States.
That's awesome. Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough for
My pleasure.
your very candid opinions and predictions, and hopefully we will unite around democracy in the years to come. But do you have any parting words or final thoughts?
We are a resilient country. We do this. We are hurt. We are wounded. We are damaged. But the only thing that is a real danger to us is our own, Well, here, this is my next book. We Are Our Own Worst Enemy. And that's the thing that we have to overcome. We have to decide to be better citizens. We have to decide to be more adult about how we approach politics. We have to be more stoic in our approach. We have to learn to take the occasional loss. We have to learn to compromise. We have to learn to negotiate. But we have to always approach politics not as a means of self-actualization or as an expression of virtue or as some drama in which we're the big hero toting a gun into the Michigan legislature to save the blah, blah. Democracy is boring. It's grunt work. It takes showing up and grinding away at it every day. We can do this. So we've taken a great step in 2020. We've averted one of the worst existential crises. I think 4 more years of Donald Trump was not survivable for American democracy. And now, let's take the ball and run with it. And by that, I don't mean everybody get behind Joe Biden and, cheerlead for, what this policy or that policy. It's pay attention to elections, be an informed consumer of the news, be more civic in your attitudes, be determined to show up for every election. And the only thing you don't compromise on is fidelity to the Constitution of the United States. You do that, we're going to get out of this. We'll make it.
It's so well said, Tom. Really, thank you. And when that new book is published, please let us know immediately so we
Will
can
do.
share it. And we'd love to have you back to talk about that book. So much healing still to come. Want to thank you all for your great questions, very thoughtful. As always, it's wonderful to have you, and please come back, join us again for another of our virtual events. We're always glad to have it, and send along any of your suggestions for more talks like this, talks, social events, you name it, you send it our way and we help us make it happen. So again, thank you. A recording of this will be available shortly, and I wish you all a very healthy and safe and happy new year. Good night, Tom. Thank you, everyone.